The river is rising. It has been rising for 40 days, this dark, slow surge pushing north from somewhere deep in Africa that the Egyptians have never seen, fed by monsoon rains on mountains they have never climbed. The Nile is doing what the Nile has always done, flooding the valley it carved, spreading across the flat black soil on both sides of its banks, depositing the silt from Central Africa that will make wheat and barley grow in a desert. The Egyptians call this silt the Black Land, Kemet. It is the most valuable substance in the world they know, and it comes free, delivered by a river every single year, with the reliability of a god who keeps his promises. Beyond the black strip on each bank, the desert begins, the red land, Deshret. And it begins immediately, with no transition. One step, and you are in fertility. 2 steps back, and you are in sand. The Egyptians understood with perfect clarity that their entire civilization existed in the width of the river's gift, and that the gift came from the annual catastrophe of the flood. The destruction was the creation. They called it Akhet, the season of inundation, and they welcomed it as the gift of Hapi, the Nile god, who sent his annual blessing south to north along the artery of their world. Welcome to Mystique History. What was a single day truly like in ancient Egypt, along the green strip of the world's longest river, in one of humanity's most enduring civilizations? Let me explain. It is around 1270 BCE, the New Kingdom, the era of Rameses II, when Egypt's empire stretches from Nubia in the south to the borders of the Hittite lands in the north, and when Thebes, the great southern capital, contains within its sacred precincts the largest temple complex ever built on the face of the earth. The flood has receded now. It is Péré, the growing season, and the fields along both banks are dense with young wheat. They're green, a color that no Egyptian ever takes for granted because it represents the thin margin between life and the desert. A farmer named Nebwenenef stands knee-deep in the irrigation channel he has been maintaining since before the sun came up, pushing mud from the channel walls with a wooden hoe, clearing the flow so that water from the Nile reaches the outer edge of his allocated strips. The work is heavy, and the sun is already at a temperature that means everything outdoors must be finished before midday. He has been doing this since he was 8 years old, watching his father, and he will do it until he cannot. His son, who is 7, stands at the edge of the channel, watching him with the attention of someone who is learning by observation what school will never need to teach. The house Nebwenenef returns to at midday stands in a village on the east bank of the Nile, one of dozens that line the river between Thebes to the south and the horizon to the north. It is made of mud brick, sun-dried blocks of Nile clay mixed with chopped straw and sand, and its 4 rooms are cool even in the heat because the walls are thick and the single window faces north, capturing the prevailing breeze off the river. The floor is beaten earth covered with reed mats. There is a wooden stool, a low table, clay storage vessels ranked along the wall in the back room. In the first room, near the door, there is a small niche containing a figure of Bes, the squat, ferocious-looking household god who protects women in childbirth and keeps evil from the threshold. Nebwenenef's wife placed fresh flowers there this morning, as she does every morning, because the relationship with the gods is not conducted only in temples. It is conducted in small rooms at the beginning of every day, at the kitchen hearth, and at the door. The kitchen is outside, in the shaded courtyard behind the house, because cooking over an open fire in an enclosed room in an Egyptian summer is not something anyone survives willingly. Nebwenenef's wife, Merit, is grinding barley in the central courtyard, her arm moving in the circular motion that she can maintain for an hour without thinking. The ground grain will go into bread today, flat, round loaves baked in clay moulds heated in the outdoor oven. And the coarser grain will go into the fermentation pot that produces the thick, low-alcohol beer that is the basic caloric beverage of every Egyptian household. Not wine. Wine is for the wealthy, for the temple offerings, for the officials who live in the larger mud brick compounds near the administrative buildings. Beer is for everyone, drunk through reed straws that filter out the grain sediment. It contains more calories per cup than bread does. It is not a luxury. It is food in liquid form, and the fact that it has been fermented means it is safer to drink than the river water in the canals, which is what it replaces. Here is something that reveals the everyday texture of this civilization more precisely than any monumental inscription. The workers who built and decorated the royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings, the elite craftsmen who lived in the purpose-built village on the west bank called Deir el-Medina, the place of truth, were paid primarily in bread and beer. The state records from this village survive in their thousands, scratched onto pottery shards and clay tablets, and they tell us with extraordinary precision what each worker received. An ordinary craftsman received each month 300 litres of emmer wheat for bread and 110 litres of barley for beer. A foreman received more. A scribe received more still. The hierarchy of ancient Egypt expressed itself not only in the size of your house or the richness of your tomb, but in the thickness of your beer, literally. The brewing ratio at Deir el-Medina was adjusted by social rank, so that a foreman's beer was stronger than a labourer's, made from a richer proportion of grain to water. Status ran through the fermentation vessel like a social code. The market near the riverbank opens when the morning's fieldwork slows, and it is the East Bank's busiest intersection of human need.
My fish are worth more than 3 of your onions, my friend.
There is no coin in New Kingdom Egypt. Coinage will not arrive for another 1,000 years. And so every transaction is a negotiation of equivalence.
3 copper deben for that row.
I offer these onions, fresh from the fields, for 2 of your large Nile.
The woman selling dried fish from the river arranges them on a flat mat beside a woman selling ceramic pots, and a man with a basket of onions, and they trade. Voices rise and fall in the practiced rhythm of bargaining, hands gesture over goods, and the particular social choreography of the ancient marketplace, the arrival, the examination, the counter-offer, the eventual agreement sealed with a nod, plays out in exactly the way it plays out in every human marketplace across every millennium. The exchange values are understood by everyone from long custom. A sandal is worth 2 jars of oil, which is worth a certain weight of copper, which is worth a quantity of grain. The deben, a copper weight of about 90 grams, serves as a notional unit of account even though no one carries it as currency. You say your pot is worth 5 deben of copper, and the person who wants it offers you grain to that value. The negotiation is social as much as commercial. You bargain not only for the goods, but for the dignity of being seen as a fair dealer. The Nile is the market's highway as much as its location. Wooden boats with single masts carrying a rectangular sail move both directions on the river, north with the current, south with the wind, because in Egypt the Nile flows north and the prevailing wind blows south, which means the river and the wind together give you a road that runs in both directions with minimal effort. Every Egyptian child knows this. They know which way is north because the river tells you, and they know the Nile not as a geographical fact, but as the living presence that organizes all other facts around it. The boats on the water this morning carry grain from upriver, livestock from the fields outside the city, quarried stone from Aswan, bound for the temples being built perpetually on both sides of the river, and, in a long vessel with a canopy at the stern, a family of merchants from a Theban trading house returning from a buying trip south, their boat loaded with Nubian gold and ebony and ivory that will make their way into the workshops of the city's goldsmiths and craftsmen. On the west bank, a different world. The living city is on the east bank, where the sun rises, where crops grow, where commerce and family happen. The west bank is where the sun sets, where the dead belong, where generation after generation of pharaohs have cut their tombs into the limestone cliffs of the Valley of the Kings, and where the craftsmen of Deir el-Medina spend their working days in the dark corridors of tombs that will not be finished for years. The painters among them are working this morning by lamplight, small clay oil lamps burning vegetable oil through papyrus wicks, each wick calculated to burn for exactly 8 hours because the working shift is 8 hours. By that light, in a passage cut 60 feet into the rock, a man is painting the interior chamber of a tomb wall with images from the Book of the Dead. He uses brushes made of rushes, pigments ground from minerals, red ochre from hematite, yellow from orpiment, green from malachite, blue from copper ground with sand, black from charcoal. These colors are mixed with water and a binding agent, then applied to a thin plaster surface over the rock. When this tomb is sealed, these paintings will exist in the dark for thousands of years. When they are finally opened again, in the 19th and 20th centuries, the colors will still be fresh. The principle behind this extraordinary effort is not vanity. It is theology. Egyptians organized their entire existence around the concept of Ma'at. The word means truth, justice, order, balance, harmony, the underlying condition that the gods maintained through right action and that humans maintained by living rightly. The pharaoh was the earthly mediator of Ma'at, the living god whose correct performance of religious duties kept the cosmos in order. Every temple, every tomb painting, every offering, every prayer contributed to the maintenance of this equilibrium. And if Ma'at failed, if the floods did not come, if the harvest withered, if the divine order broke down, the consequences were not political. They were cosmological. Egypt believed it was responsible for holding the universe together. This was not arrogance. It was an enormous obligation that shaped every ritual, every law, every exchange of goods, and every decision made from the throne of the pharaoh to the doorstep of a village like Nebwenenefs. The temple of Amun at Karnak, on the east bank of Thebes, the spiritual axis of the empire, has been under construction and expansion for over 200 years by the time of Rameses II, and it will continue for another 1,000. At this moment, in 1270 BCE, it is already the largest religious complex in human history, its columns taller than any other stone construction on Earth, its hypostyle hall, a forest of 134 columns, the largest reaching 23 meters, carved and painted with scenes of royal triumph and divine procession, so dense that the interior is always in shadow even at noon. The approach to the temple along the Avenue of Sphinxes is itself a statement of power. Ram-headed stone figures stretching in rows from the Nile's edge to the entrance pylons, their stone shoulders worn smooth by the hands of generations of worshippers passing between them. The priests who serve Amun in this hall are not mystics in the romantic sense. They are administrators, managing the god's enormous estates, organizing the daily rituals that feed and clothe and care for the divine statue in its inner sanctuary. The temple owns land. It employs scribes. It pays workers in grain. It operates workshops and bakeries and breweries. The god of Karnak is the richest landholder in Egypt, and his servants are the most powerful institution outside the palace itself. A temple ritual begins before dawn. The head priest, having purified himself with cold water and incense, enters the inner sanctuary and breaks the clay seal on the shrine that has kept the god's golden statue undisturbed since the previous evening. He lights a small lamp, presents offerings of bread and beer and linen on the altar, and performs the sequence of ritual words and actions that constitutes the morning opening of the god's household. This ritual has been performed in essentially the same form for hundreds of years, and will be performed in similar form for hundreds more. It is not dramatic. It is domestic, intimate, and precise, a household waking up the head of the family and preparing his breakfast. The god Amun is treated as literally present in his statue, literally in need of food and clothing and company, and the priest's role is the maintenance of this household, this relationship between the human and the divine that keeps the cosmos properly aligned. Most Egyptians do not enter the temple's inner precincts. The hypostyle hall, the outer courts, the pylons, these are for the priests and for the king. The ordinary Egyptian's relationship with the temple is conducted in the outer courts and in the processional routes, during festival days when the god's statue is carried out of the inner sanctuary in its sacred bark, borne on the shoulders of priests through the crowds gathered along the avenue of sphinxes that approaches the temple gates. These festivals are the great occasions of the public year. The Opet festival at Thebes, when the statue of Amun is carried along the Nile processional route from Karnak to the Temple of Luxor 2 miles south, draws enormous crowds along both banks and on the river itself. The procession is accompanied by music, percussion, wind instruments, the sistrums that priestesses shake in a metallic shimmer, and by the acrobatic dancers who move along the route in front of the god's bark. On festival days, the state provides bread and beer to the population along the route. The crowd shouts its joy. The god passes. The universe remains aligned. Ka was a real man. He was a foreman at Deir el-Medina during the reign of Amenhotep III, and when he and his wife Merit were buried in the late 15th century BCE, their tomb was sealed and untouched for 3,000 years. When Italian archaeologist Ernesto Schiaparelli opened it in 1906, he found the contents intact, the furniture Ka and Merit had used in life, the cosmetics Merit had applied to her face each morning, her wigs still in their wooden boxes, her linen dresses folded in cedar chests. Ka's carpenter's tools were there. His set square and plumb bob, their surfaces still showing the marks of 3,000 years of use. His bronze razor, a cubit rod, the standard measure of length that still bore his name. His roll of papyrus inscribed with extracts from the Book of the Dead, 2 wooden stools with woven seats, a lamp, a table. The bread and food offerings placed for the journey, still identifiable after 30 centuries. Everything that a skilled craftsman and his wife had assembled over a lifetime of work in the service of the pharaoh's eternal house, and everything they needed for the same life after. The Egyptians did not believe in another kind of life. They believed in this one, continued. The afterlife was the best version of the existence they already knew. The same house, the same tools, the same flat bread, and the same river. Just without illness or flood failure or the particular anxiety of not knowing whether the rations would arrive on time. As the afternoon heat reaches its peak, the city contracts to the shade of walls and courtyards. Nebwenenef is asleep on his roof, a linen cloth over his face against the flies. Merit has taken the children to her mother's house along the lane. The market has thinned to a few stubborn sellers waiting out the heat for the afternoon's last customers. On the Nile, the boats are still moving, They never stop entirely, their sails bright against the water. On the west bank, the craftsmen have broken for their midday rest in the huts near the tomb entrance, and the Valley of the Kings sits in its enormous silence, its paths empty, the limestone cliffs radiating the stored heat of the morning. The evening brings the city back. The cooking fires in the courtyards, the smell of onions and fish, and the particular sweetness of fresh bread from the mud ovens. Children running between houses in the cooling air, their feet bare on the still warm, packed earth of the lane. A neighbor stopping at Nebwenenef's door to trade a jar of oil for 2 loaves of bread, the transaction noted by both parties on a pottery shard that serves as a receipt. Dogs finding the shade of the date palms. On the river, the last boats of the day moving in the dimming light. The stars beginning above the date palms, the same stars that priests on the temple roof are observing with instruments and recording on papyrus, tracking the movements that govern the agricultural calendar, that announce the rising of the Nile, that tell the king when to hold his ceremonies and the farmer when to plant his seed. Nebwenenef walks to the edge of his roof in the dusk and looks at the river. It is lower now than it was in Akhet, its banks visible, its dark surface lit by the last of the sky's color. The particular amber that the Egyptian sky makes at sunset, a gold so specific to this latitude and this dust that painters in the New Kingdom tombs tried to capture it and, in certain chambers, succeeded. Tomorrow, the irrigation work continues. In another month, the wheat in the fields will be tall enough to harvest. He has been watching this sequence since he was a child, and his father watched it, and his grandfather. In 3,000 years of recorded Egyptian history, the Nile will flood and recede, and the farmers will plant and harvest, and the temples will be served, and the scribes will write it all down on papyrus and on stone. The continuity is not stagnation, it is confidence, the confidence of a civilization that has found a way to live that works and knows it. The river is the answer to every question Egypt ever asked, and every morning it rises in the south and moves toward the sea, reliable as breath. If you want to travel back to the oldest layers of human civilization and feel the weight of the stone and the warmth of the black earth, subscribe to Mystique History. This is what we do every episode. The history that stretches back beyond memory to the moment when the Nile first made a city possible. Subscribe now and never miss what we uncover next. I'm your host at Mystique History, and I want to know, what historical event should I recreate next? Let me know in the comments.